Hi there, welcome to the show. I'm your host, John Ivison. I'm joined as usual by Andrew Balfour of Rubicon Strategies and Rupa Subramanya, freelance journalist who writes for The Post. So guys, I thought we should delve straight into the political and economic implications of what's happening in Ukraine. Hot off the press, breaking news as they say, the United Nations has voted on a resolution today to condemning Russia. When Russia invaded Crimea in 2014, there was a vaguely similar motion which received the approval of only 51% of countries at the UN. There were a lot of abstentions and a lot of countries that were absent. Today, 73% of the 193 UN countries backed the censure of Russia, which may have implications in policy terms, we don't know yet. But just to give you an idea of who voted with Russia, Belarus, North Korea, Eritrea and Syria. Not a very august group. There were 35 abstentions, notable of which was India, which we could maybe touch on. Kazakhstan, which somewhat surprised me, but I guess given the fact that it's next to Russia and feels it may be in similar boat at some point, it also abstained. And South Africa, which I find kind of disgraceful, frankly. A pretty modern, prosperous democracy and basically sitting on the fence. What do we make of it, Rupa?
Well, the UN General Assembly vote is non-binding, right? It's a great platform to virtue signal, but it doesn't really end up doing anything. You can vote any way you want at the UN General Assembly, but it really has no meaning or teeth. Where it counts is the Security Council, and that's where India, China, and the UAE abstained. But, at the end of the day, what matters is what these countries are actually doing, no matter how they vote at the UN. So Israel, for example, has taken a neutral position. South Africa, that you mentioned, initially came out strongly against Russia and then backtracked a couple of days later. Brazil, I think, has also maintained a neutral stance on the conflict.
I think Brazil voted for this time. It wasn't in the list of
in the General Assembly. But I'm just talking about countries that have just publicly, their politicians, their foreign ministers have taken a public position on these things, quite apart from what has happened in the UN. And India, of course, which is abstained now once again, and so that's, if you take all of these countries together, that's basically a third to half of humanity, which is staying neutral and doesn't want to get sucked into this war.
Just to correct you, this is under the United for Peace mechanism, which has only been invoked, I think, 11 times, and it hasn't been invoked at all in the last 40 years. It does allow the UN to take action. I mean, it seems unlikely, but it's possible that it could even suggest that there's a UN force that goes into, gets involved here. I mean, in Korea they did. It seems unlikely they will do that. They could also look at crimes against humanity. There could even be a move to expel Russia. So this is not entirely teethless, but I take your point. I mean, UN has traditionally been a talking shop. Andrew, do you think there are implications?
Well, I mean, I think that what we're seeing now is that the world is very much paying attention to this, and I understand why some of these countries would be staying out of it, but to Rupa's point about population-wise, well, India and China themselves just suck up a chunk of that, but obviously China is not going to get involved in this. But if you look at all the G7 and NATO nations, they're certainly all front and center, and that's the driving force of world democracy.
I mean, I think it does matter, and it does send Putin the message. His opinion is that borders have changed throughout history, and that great powers can essentially do what they want. And he wants to see Russia restored as a great power, a new entity that includes Ukraine and Belarus, a new epoch that dominates a divided and humiliated West. The fly in the ointment for him is that the West is not divided or humiliated, and that now 75% of the world's nations have chastised him for what he's doing. And I don't think it's too much to say that this is a defense of the world order, of the rules-based order, and a rejection of the idea that might is right and that countries that want to can just take what they want. Can we go back to, I want to go back to a letter that was, or a statement that was just issued by the Russian Federation in Canada. And it reminded me of the old George Orwell quote about political language designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable. In the statement it said that the Russian army is not occupying Ukrainian territory and is taking all means to preserve the lives and safety of civilians. It says strikes are targeted at military facilities only. It says that the Ukrainians are using citizens as human shields. And it says the Ukrainian authorities are committing monstrous and inhuman provocations and are responsible for the destruction of innocent victims. Russia is not starting wars, it is ending them, it says. Now, I realize all sides are guilty of propaganda and falsifying the truth, but I think we're seeing with our own eyes that Russia is occupying Ukrainian territory. It is hitting apartment blocks with missiles, and it unilaterally started the war. Rupa, am I wrong?
No, I think you're right. This is propaganda. A lot of it, I read the letter, and a lot of it is Russian propaganda. There's propaganda on all sides. And of course, you have to, treat it as such, that it is propaganda. Yeah.
Andrew?
Well, I mean, something you left out was the multiple references of varying forms of the word Nazi, which I found quite amazing. But sure, there's a bit of propaganda on every side, but you can't possibly be looking at any of the news coverage and believing a single thing that is said in this statement or anything that's really coming out of Russia. And the people in the Ukraine are under attack. There are thousands of people dying. I mean, I don't support your comment that there's propaganda on all sides when one party involved is going in and actively attacking another just for the sake of taking over their territory. To John's earlier point, to make use the Donald Trump term, make Russia great again.
Rupa, do you want to respond?
Look, I mean, I'm not necessarily seeing this as, I'm not taking sides here. I'm just looking at it as a neutral observer, and I treat everything that I see coming out, whether it's from NATO, whether it is from the Russians or the Ukrainians or anyone for that matter, I'm very careful about what I see out there and how I interpret these things. And, this has been pitched as a battle between good versus evil, us versus them. You're with us or against us. Now, where have we seen this before? I have learned from my mistakes, from my past mistakes of taking some positions on the Afghanistan war or interventions in Iraq. And so therefore that has made me a little, I'm a little cynical about these things. I'd rather wait to see what happens before I buy into any claims here.
But I respectfully suggest that your Twitter feed has not been even-handed, that you have not been, for instance, showing pictures of bombed out Ukrainian apartment buildings, but you have been reposting a lot of stuff about the Azov unit and neo-Nazis in Ukraine, even though you acknowledge that party's political wing only got 1% in the recent elections, and there is no representation of that party.
That is not. If you read serious analysis of the Azov battalion in Ukraine, which is, by the way, part of the National Guard, they're very much part of the Ukrainian establishment. There was a news report in the Ottawa Citizen last fall of Canadian forces training members of the Azov battalion, and there was an inquiry into this, and the Canadian military was deeply embarrassed about this finding because members of the Azov battalion were posting these pictures on social media. If this is also innocuous, why be embarrassed about it?
Well, I don't think anybody's suggesting it's innocuous, but there's an information war going on as well as a kinetic war.
No.
And the Western coverage of the Azov is being used by the Russians to justify
Pretty
a war
much.
to denazify Ukraine.
Pretty much, I don't buy into the Russian, what the Russians are saying. I'm stating a fact. Far-right militias in Ukraine are an established fact. Before any of this started, we could have had a discussion about this a year ago, and you and I probably would have been in agreement about this. The fact is that they've been brought into this conflict. They're recruiting foreign fighters to come in and fight. And they're very much part of the Ukrainian establishment. Whether they barely won 1% of the vote is not relevant, because they're very much part of Ukraine, of the Ukrainian establishment.
I think it is relevant because it suggests that they are a fringe to the mainstream of Ukrainian society, which is under siege right now.
But that's...
Anyway, we're going to get bogged down. Last word to you, Rupa, then we'll move on to a new subject.
Sure.
Well, you have a last word.
No, it's not a reflection of Ukrainian society. It is a reality of Ukraine right now. It doesn't mean that most Ukrainians, necessarily even, are buy into neo-Nazi beliefs. No one is saying that. But the fact of the matter is that you cannot wish this away, given that they are playing an important role in the current conflict. Okay,
so Bob Rae, our man at the UN, has been saying that the vote for the UN Charter is not picking sides, it's about the rule of law. Fiona Hill, who is the eminent Russologist who worked for Donald Trump as well as the previous democratic regime, calls Ukraine the front line of the struggle, not just between democracies and autocracies, but between the battle to maintain the rules-based system. She says we're all dreading World War III, but we're in it already, and that she has no doubt that Putin will use nuclear weapons if he feels cornered. Andrew, are the stakes that high?
Well, I don't think that he would have put everything on high alert if it wasn't that high. I mean, the threats against the Finns were quite odd as well. And, even just looking outside of whether ends up being a nuclear issue or not, all of the super wealthy Russians, we've seen them. Now the Chelsea football team is going to be sold off. They're all moving their assets to places where they can't be taken away because, the president last night was quite clear about taking away all of the oligarchs and super wealthy Russians' assets, and now they're all moving them in. I mean, this is, anyone who sees where this is going knows that it's not going in a good place.
Rupa, what do you think? Are the stakes that high?
Yeah, I see. Look, here's the thing. I don't want a nuclear war. I don't want to see that happen. Neither do I want to see Ukrainians being used as cannon fodder. The Americans and the Brits have made it very clear they're not sending their troops in, but instead they're happy to arm ordinary Ukrainians and then empowering all of these various militias within the country. I think this is a really, really bad situation to be in. We've seen this movie play out in Afghanistan and Iraq. And here we're dealing with a nuclear armed state. And that's what worries me more than anything.
Well, what would you suggest? Because the Ukrainians are going to fight anyway, whether they're armed by the British or the US or not.
Yeah, it's a very tough situation. I can see NATO's perspective. They have to be seen as doing something. But they've stopped short of sending their own troops.
Because that would be the Third World War. If you establish a no-fly zone over Ukraine, you by definition have to attack Russian planes, and you have to attack where they come from, which is in Russia. Yeah. You have to attack the missile defense systems that defend them, and therefore your NATO, which is a defensive organization, would be on the offensive. So that is a non-starter. Yeah, no, that would not be a good situation to be in. I don't have the solutions. I really don't. But I don't think, all I can say is that I don't think arming civilians and using them as cannon fodder is something that are we okay living with that? I know I'm not. I'm not okay sitting watching on my phone as that noose tightens around Kyiv and all the other cities in Ukraine, and their people are bombed into submission without us trying our utmost to help them. I'm not comfortable with that.
And I think that that's a very important point that a lot of people seem to be missing in this, is that in the absence of us going in and doing something as NATO, or if the UN decided to do something, what other options are there? I mean,
Sanctions, we've done sanctions, so
we've
that's
done
good.
sanctions. How's
Yeah.
that working out? There's
But
no
no,
problem.
but on the sanctions are designed to bite over time, and arming the Ukrainians is buying time, and I think the resistance has been unbelievable given the forces arrayed against them. I mean, part of that, the reason that the resistance has been so dogmatic and so successful is because clearly the Russians were not prepared, and sending in very green conscripts who didn't know where they were going, far less that they were going to be fighting, and who thought when they did get there they would be garlanded with flowers, has not worked for the Russians thus far. So knowing Putin, just gets more brutal. They just start lobbing more ordnance in from further and further away. Andrew, let's just move on to a subject we're all more comfortable with, perhaps. The Canadian government. How's Trudeau's government been doing?
I think that for the most part that the members of cabinet that are responsible for this have been stepping up and doing a decent job. I think that we're quite sincere about our want to help in this, but I mean, no matter how well we're doing or not doing, I don't think that Mr. Putin is waking up every morning wondering what kind of sanctions the government of Canada is putting on him or what Canada is doing. I mean, we're not a power in that sense.
We're not, but I think were we absent, it would be noticed.
Absolutely.
Rupa, what do you
Yeah.
think?
I think they've done everything that they possibly could. I think they've done the sanctions. They've now announced that they're stopping the import of Russian oil. All of those are good steps, and hopefully it'll have some impact on the conflict. I do also think that this is an opportunity to slight digression that Trudeau is going to ride this wave. I think the events of the last 3 weeks related to Freedom Convoy protests, I think, will be forgotten, and I think Trudeau and his government, especially Chrystia Freeland, will ride this wave.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. So we're running out. We've run out of time, but I just wanted to finally say, I noted that Andrew Leslie, the former Lieutenant General and Liberal Party MP, noticed that Canada should be preparing for war, and I don't think he was overblowing the situation. We've got a budget coming up, and I think it's incumbent on this government to start taking the defence of Canada seriously, and that means providing money for our Northern Radar system, expediting our jets, doing all the other things that are required to make up for what has been another decade of darkness when it comes to defence of Canada. Anyhow, we're out of time. Thanks for having a respectful, civil debate on a really tough subject. Have a great week.
Thank you.